Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating, from the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day. Each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello, and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. So today we were supposed to have two guests. In the first hour, Dean Dominic De Lucia, and in the second hour, Jerry Pippin. But Jerry had to back out of the interview. He hasn't been feeling very well, and I'm a little bit worried. As some of you know, Jerry of jerrypippin.com is a very good friend of mine, and this is just a shout-out to him that he's in our thoughts and our prayers, and if you all could just send him some good, positive, healing energy, I would appreciate it, and I'm sure he would too. So we actually are going to have Dean stay on the show with us for both hours, and I have to tell you, after going through his book and stuff, you're going to be glad because, as you know, me and my list of questions, I have quite the list, and I just barely scratched the surface. But don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the services that I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, clairvoyant readings, and energy medicine to help bring health, healing, and wholeness into your life. So check it out. Give me a call. Set up a time for a reading. It's all good. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. And do please go to the Just Energy Radio webpage. That's www.justenergyradio.com, where you can sign up for our free newsletter that will keep you informed of all the upcoming guests that are coming on the show. Also, you can check out our over 5 years, 5 years worth of archives on that website. Also, just a heads up, we have been posting the Just Energy Radio archives on YouTube, so if you want to listen to it in a streaming format on your phone, I think you just need to search on Just Energy Radio, and it'll bring up all of the shows. And you can subscribe to Just Energy Radio on YouTube and keep informed of when we load new material, which is every week. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Dean and get him on the air because, as I said, I got this big list of questions. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about is the hollow earth theory, which we've tried to do before but just has not moved forward, and so I think this is going to be really cool and interesting. Dean Dominic De Lucia studied business administration at the University of Baltimore and later on completed a 2-year course in translating at the Catholic University in São Paulo, Brazil, where he currently resides. He has maintained a lifelong interest in Indian/Hindu philosophy and spiritual practices, which ultimately led him to take up Vedic astrology. Dean maintains a unique perspective, one of presenting pure Vedic astrology in its original form without hodge-podging it with other systems. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, the author of The Hollow Earth and the Puranas, his website, holloworbs.com, Dean Dominic De Lucia. Hey, Dean, how are you?
Well, Dr. Rita, I'm doing just fine. I'd like to thank you for bringing me on your show, and I'd like to say I think that I'm really going to enjoy it.
Well, good. I think it's going to be great. Like I am always prepared for all of my interviews. I always have, a handful of questions, and I sat down and started going through your material, and it was like, okay, here's another one. Oop, here's another one. Oop, here's another one. And like I said, I just barely, I feel, scratched the surface. So I'm really, I'm not really glad that Jerry's not feeling good, but I'm really glad that I have you for both hours, because it'll give us more time to visit and go deeper into this whole topic, which seems kind of huge, but no one really knows about. So before we get into the whole thing, how did you become interested in the whole concept of a hollow Earth?
Well, I was very interested in alternative astronomy, always. I have telescopes. I've had telescopes for maybe 20, 25 years now. And I'm one of the, I've always had an alternative perspective. I don't know, maybe I'm a bit of a wrangler or something. But even back in the 70s, I was very dubious about this whole Apollo idea. And, of course, I ran across the face on Mars, the Hoagland material, like that. And I always used to peruse the Internet and look at alternative astronomy material. And then I found some material on the hollow Earth, and I started reading about it. And it rang a bell. A few of the issues that I had with the Vedas, with specifically the Puranic literature, were answered by this idea of the Earth being hollow. And I decided to investigate it a little bit further, and I found out more than I ever imagined. Let's put it that way.
So when we say hollow, do you mean like empty, an empty sphere? Something like, when I think of it, the first thing that comes to mind is that book, Journey to the Center of the Earth, where they go down and they get to the middle of the Earth, and as opposed to being molten magma, it's, this got a little ocean and some trees, and there's kind of a sun in the background. That's the imagery that comes to mind. Is that what we're talking about here?
Well, there are two concepts, and that is one of them, really, that the Earth is a cavity, that the Earth is hollow, the crust of the Earth is a shell. There are orifices, openings at the polar extremes, and inside the environment is actually very nice. That's what's been reported. Now, the other concept is a concept that we call cavern worlds. And cavern worlds are worlds within the crust, cities within the crust. Some of these have been reported by UFO abductees.
Which is a topic we're going to get totally into.
Sure.
Based on what you've read, which do you feel is more realistic, practical, or are you still on the fence? Is it a big hollow Earth, no magma core, or do you think it's more the subterranean realms, or could it be both?
Oh, no, definitely both. Definitely both exist. The one, how do you say, difference of opinion that I've had to juggle is which has a stronger, more immediate impact on us living on the surface of the Earth. And I definitely think that the cavern worlds concept, the cavern world's reality, I'll put it that way, has a very direct and immediate impact on us living on the surface of the Earth.
All right, I'm going to bite. Why would...
Okay.
I was kind of wanting to hold off on this piece of conversation. We will go here right now. Why would it have more of an immediate impact on us?
Well, because we're closer to those worlds, and I think we're more immediately accessible by them. For example, just to give one example, let's think about the chupacabras. Now, the chupacabras, they don't live in the clouds. Let's put it that way. They're not above us. They don't live in the sky, and to tell you the truth, they don't live around us either. Or else their habitat would have been discovered by now. There would have been more sightings. something like that. So if they're not above us and they don't have an existence laterally, where do they exist? Where do they live? They must live below. And in this way, there are many creatures that live below us in these cavern worlds. They've been typically reported in folklore, definitely in European folklore, and now I'm speaking about Tolkien. Now I'm speaking about goblins, I'm speaking about gnomes, I'm speaking about trolls, I'm speaking about fairies, I'm speaking about elves and their activities and their impact and their manipulations on or of the surface world. And also the Bigfoot. We're speaking about the Bigfoot here. Bigfoot has been seen. There's a wonderful, how would you say, a wonderful explanation of the Bigfoot in this book by Cremo, Forbidden Archaeology. In the appendix, he reproduces this Russian account of a Russian division that was in Afghanistan. This was back in the 1920s, because they also had some military activity in Afghanistan in the 20s. And this Russian division encountered some insurgents, and there was a battle, and the insurgents took to the mountains, they took to the caves, and they went deep in the caves. And they were met by a whole tribe of Bigfoot, and they had a battle inside the caves, and the Russians were outside, and they came running out, and they surrendered. They surrendered to the Russians. When they were being interrogated, they explained to the Russians, to their horror, what they encountered in these caves, the types of beings. The Russians went in there, and they found one of them shot dead, pulled him out. They had a doctor with him. The doctor conducted an autopsy. This thing was about 9 feet tall. It had whitish hair. It had a pinkish face. It had a face which was much more of a man's face, definitely a man's face, rather than a simian face or gorilla face, nothing like that. And, this was an autopsy signed by a medical doctor, and the general or colonel, whoever was this military officer. So this right there gives you an idea of how immediate our contact can be, has been at times, with these creatures living in cavern worlds right below our feet. Whereas the hollow world is very far away. It's difficult to access, and I don't know. To me, it just seems more distant. It seems like something I'll never encounter. I'll never go there, but I know about it. Something like that.
The stories that you're sharing of these creatures that live in present day, I'll just say, they sound, I'm going to say, kind of kooky. Like, what have you been smoking this week? However, I have a big however. When you look at mythology, there are, as you say, there are stories upon stories upon stories of these subterranean worlds and these people that inhabit these realms, but then they just kind of stop talking about it. You don't hear about it anymore, so you figure, they just say all the mythology is a bunch of hooey anyway, and if you believe that the mythology is true, you must be crazy too.
Yeah, well, mythology, and I think a closer word to us would be folklore. These beings have always existed in folklore, in European folklore. And it's not. It seems so far away. Like it's turned into fairy tale. It's turned into myth. But it wasn't myth when these things were written down. It wasn't myth when these things were experienced by the people. There's a lot of them. I think we could talk about a few of them. Even the Pied Piper of Hamelin. This is a fairy tale for children. It's in Grimm's fairy tales. But this was, they included it for children. They put it in their fairy tale book. But this existed before as a true account. It's just that it's been so long now. It's been something like 800 years that it's kind of difficult to verify. But some of the some of the characteristics of these stories we've heard before. The children were enchanted. There was some frequency that was employed. They were hypnotized. The mountain opened up. The children walked in. The mountain closed again. We've run across this before, even in the Tibetan folklore, about some of the entrances to the cavern worlds, how they've been closed up with boulders, and the people know where they are, more or less, but nobody goes there. They don't know how to open the door. They don't know what the mantras are or the frequencies, that kind of thing. But are these stories really myth, or are they reality? It's just been so long.
Well, I mean, but there are even people that claim that in Dulce, New Mexico, there's an underground government installation, but inside that installation, there are beings or creatures that live there, that have lived there, and we just kind of found them and created some kind of an agreement that we could hang out with them.
Well, I don't know what the specifics are, but I have no doubt that these creatures live in these cavern worlds below the earth. And I know that our government and also the Russian government, they have been excavating and digging and establishing underground cities with black funds for a few decades now. I can remember reading about things like that in the 70s, these underground cities that they have. If you think about it, think about the continental drift theory. You've got these plates sitting on top of the crust, and apparently there's some movement. Well, the plates are not smooth. Of course, they're going to be jagged underneath. Imagine all the scratching and scraping that must go on. Certainly, you're going to have hollows. You're going to have openings, caverns that open up, that are scratched out between these two surfaces because of the friction. And they're going to be maybe a mile or so high, and they're going to be maybe 25, 30, or maybe 50 miles long. That's not so incomprehensible. There's certainly water down there. And as far as the omnipresent light that we've heard so much about from Tibetan folklore, that could have a scientific basis too. Go ahead.
Explain that, because that's one of the places I always get stuck is, sort of using something that is luminescent in nature. How do they get light down there?
Well, first of all, there are some creatures that do not use photons. Their eyes are not sensitive to photons, or rather they may be sensitive to photons, but they're also sensitive to other particles. Photons apparently bounce off the surface of the Earth because they are so small. But there are other particles that pass right through. So these cave entities that were found by the Russian patrol, and also, for example, cats can see in the dark. Their eyes are apparently picking up on other particles down there. They have their sunshine, which is different from our sunshine, so to speak. So first of all, there's that. But then there's one Hollow Earth writer, and he's a physicist, Joseph H. Cater, and his theory is that these particles from the sun that pass through the Earth, of course they're electrons, but his theory is that electrons are actually made up of photons, and that as they pass through the Earth's crust, there is friction because of forces opposed, and they begin to fragment and break up. And this is what we hear from some of the few travelers, the few accounts that we have of people who have actually claimed to have accessed these worlds, that as you penetrate and as you go down through the Earth's crust, and we're talking about maybe even like 25, 30 miles. We've heard some figures like that a certain luminescence omnipresent luminescence just starts to manifest. And this would be the particles from the sun passing through the Earth, breaking up into their constituent photons, and that would account for luminosity at a certain strata, at a certain level. So if you have an opening, if you have light, and if you have water down there working its way through the rocks and, in the middle of the Earth's crust somewhere, then why can't you have life? Those are all the ingredients.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about people that have actually gone to the center of the Earth, you're talking about the book, which I actually have read, which I thought was interesting, that Olaf Jansen guy.
Right, Olaf Jansen. Well, Olaf Jansen, he passed through with his father, Jens Jansen, he passed through the hollow opening in the middle of the Arctic Ocean into the cavity. And that's the illumination there is maybe a little different, but I'm speaking of actual cavern worlds, access through caves like that. There are various stories. The Macuxi Indians in Brazil, they have a whole folklore about their, how would you say, their origin, being these underground worlds that they used to access once a year. They would travel down through the cave systems that they knew, and at a certain depth, this light would start manifesting. There's the book Etidorpa, which is Aphrodite spelled backwards, but that's the account of a man in Ohio. We actually think we know who he is, a Captain Henry Morgan, who was originally from northern New York, but he was abducted and he was brought on a journey through a tunnel system, and he passed through several cavern worlds, and he related that the force of gravity begins to diminish with depth as you pass through the crust, as you go very deep, and that also light begins to manifest, a certain luminescence, omnipresent luminescence just begins to manifest all around you. So these are the accounts that I was referring to. Olaf Jansen is very interesting too, but he was in the cavity. Okay. And the cavity, the hollow cavity, it would be like this: the illumination of the hollow cavity. Really, the sun's particles pass through the crust completely, and they'll get trapped inside the cavity, and they'll bounce around inside, and they'll begin to fragment and crack up there too. I guess the idea is similar. And then they'll congregate in the center because they'll be repulsed by the gravity from the inner surface on all sides around, and they'll congregate in the middle, and they'll form this sun, this inner sun that Olaf related. Not exactly like the sun of our solar system. He called it a copper color sun, and it was very diffuse, and it just sat there in the middle of the hollow opening. But it would be a conglomeration then of these particles that are breaking up and releasing their photons.
I know that Admiral Byrd tells a story about going into the center of the Earth. When you look at the two stories next to each other, Olaf's story and Admiral Byrd's, do you see parallels and similarities between the two?
Well, what I understand from Admiral Byrd's story is that he was there, there were beings there, they were advanced, they had technology, and there was light and there was greenery, there was vegetation. He didn't really give much of an account, number one. Number two, I'll tell you the truth, I shy away quite a bit. Actually, I shy away from both of them. I shy away from Olaf Jansen and from Byrd. Certainly from Byrd, much more. I avoid Byrd, and I'll tell you why. There's no proof whatsoever. There's no document, there's no letter, there's no recording. They say there was a film that was shown, the trailers that they used to have back in the 20s and 30s and 40s. When you go to the cinema, they would show a newsreel first before the movie would start. They say that there was a newsreel of Admiral Byrd and the camera from his airplane and showing, scenes from the hollow earth, the vegetation and things like that. But there's nobody can find one, nobody can see it. And when you start to
government
present, Yeah, no, certainly. I don't doubt that he went, and I don't doubt that there's a government cover-up. But you get on thin ice when you start proposing a hollow Earth theory like that, and that this man did this and this man did that, and you simply have nothing to show for it. Nothing under your feet, no basis for it. And it's very similar with Olaf Jansen. All we have is this book, which was written by a third party. The author's name was Emerson. It was spoken by Olaf Jansen to him on Olaf's deathbed. And we don't even have any records that anybody's been able to find of Olaf's birth in Scandinavia, in I believe it was Norway, or his family, or anything. I mean, there's just nothing. It's just a story. It's third-party evidence, and I personally take stock in Olaf Jansen's story very much. It's very descriptive, but it's not the kind of thing that I personally base my arguments on, if you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But, to me, once you start listening to these stories and you get an overpreponderance of evidence from multiple sources, all kind of saying similar things. I mean, the hollow earth, going into the hollow earth, not so many stories. The subterranean cavity world, a lot more material to compare and contrast and pay attention to. But when you start getting so much material from so many different people and so many different sources, you have to start taking a step back and going, is there really something going on with this, or is it just an entire planet's imagination?
Well, I'll agree with you on that, but at the same time, we have a nice situation that we do have hard, cold evidence to fall back on, and we have a preponderance of it. When it comes to the hollow earth, especially the Arctic opening, and the Arctic body of evidence, there's a lot.
But, people say that, then it brings in that whole conspiracy thing. People say, well, I've gone on and on Google Earth, and I don't see anything, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, this is a topic. I mean, I got very interested in the whole subterranean world, which kind of brought in the hollow earth theory, which is why I actually I guess I know more about it than I even thought that I knew about it. And like going through your stuff, it's like, wait, I already knew that.
Well, Google Earth is not, first of all, is not scientific, Google Earth. It's not a research grade program or instrument. They don't claim that. And then here's Google Earth presenting images of an area which is a security area. It's an exclusive area. It's a DEW area, the Defense Early Warning Area. Mm-hmm. And it's an area where there is censorship. There is definitely censorship of images. And they admit that. Their military has a right. And you have to take any Google Earth of that area with a grain of salt, first of all. But then we have found a few images, a few film clips, certainly of the southern opening, not so clear of the northern opening, but we've got a couple of good ones of the southern opening, of the aurora emanating from shall we say, a hole in the ground in the middle of the Antarctic continent. And also we have a kind of a close-up, let's say a medium close-up of that opening, thanks to the RadarSat mapping program. So we have research-grade, quality documented evidence, even modern evidence, scientific, astronomical satellite evidence. We do have that. And it's much more dependable than Google Earth. Of course, we're on a radio show, unfortunately. Otherwise, maybe we would pass some film clips and
well, if
show
somebody
that.
were interested in looking at these pictures or checking out the film clips, do you have like a link on your website, or how could they kind of explore that more?
Well, there's a couple ways. There's actually one very easy way, and that's to go on Yahoo Groups and look up the All Planets Hollow group on Yahoo Groups. That's All Planets, it's all together without any space, -hollow. Get on and just say, hey, Dean, I'm interested in seeing these film clips of the southern opening. I mean, that's one easy way. But then my site is www.holloworbs.com/Antarctic Auroras 123. And that's the page address. They can get to it. Yeah.
Great. One of the things that I find interesting in my kind of exploration of these subterranean worlds is that they have been finding or have found, but, of course, they don't show these really on TV. You have to really dig to find some of this stuff. Sculptures of, I'm going to say humans, they look humanoid, except as opposed to having eyes that are almond-shaped, they're big and round eyes, and when I look at them, the question my husband has had is, well, if they could do all of this great stuff, then why couldn't they represent us with the right-shaped eyes? And my comment back is, well, maybe we needed a different kind of optical apparatus because we were underground.
Okay, you're referring to what sculptures? The Aztecs or the Egyptians?
No, these are ones that have been found. Some in Ecuador, I think. We had Klaus Donna on the show, and some of his material. He's somebody you need to check out because he's found a lot of stuff in Ecuador and Colombia that are just bizarre. But these humanoid figures with these big round eyes, and then this thing, which I think you will love, he has found these pieces. Some of them are like pyramid shaped, some of them are these cups, and they have inlay in them. And what they have discovered is, and I'm not sure if this is the only light frequency, but if you shine black light on these figures where the inlaid is, they glow in the dark like a black light poster. Really interesting. Really interesting. And I'm going, well, if you're in a subterranean world, you maybe want something that glows in the dark.
Right, okay. My personal feelings on these Andean and also Aztec Indians, in Machu Picchu, for example, and also Mexico City when the Spaniards first arrived there, is that these places were like outposts. They were openings from the cavern worlds below, deep inside these Andean mountains. And that Machu Picchu, for example, was a kind of outpost, and people lived there, and they guarded the entrance. And they marshaled the Indians. They organized the Indian tribes around them, which were different tribes. The Incas, they were very big, very strong, square-shouldered. They were more like a warrior caste. And the other Indians around them were a simpler type of people. But they seemed to command the area around them and the area around the opening, and they had a permanent outpost there on top. That's my take on them. But the creatures who live below, I imagine there are various types of humanoid creatures which are, half human, half reptile, something like that. Like the Nagas, for example, they have this description.
But the Nagas are out of India, not out of South America. They have their own name, but, where you hear that word, that term, it usually comes out of Hindu tradition.
Sure. And the creatures that live below the surface in the Andes in South America, they might be a whole different race, a whole different type of being. It's true. The Nagas, however, I think that the Nagas stretch all the way over to Europe. I feel that the account, and this I originally got from Mike Mott. He's also one of the Grave Distractions authors. He has a book called Caverns, Cauldrons, and Concealed Creatures. and he speaks a lot about underground worlds. But he feels that Nimue of the legend of Arthur and Camelot, he feels that Nimue was a Naga, because the Nagas, they have been described as assuming human form, and they're very magical. They have command of all sorts of mysticism. They have a desire, or they have a history of influencing events on the surface of the world, and apparently they live underwater. I mean, they live below lakes, they live below riverbeds, and they've also been encountered along the shores of oceans. So apparently the Nagas, this Naga civilization, stretches across the Indo-European world from India to the British Isles. That's one interesting observation I'll make.
One of the things that I find very interesting, talking about the Vedic tradition, is that when they talk about groups like the Nagas, there are the Devas, who are the good gods,
right.
And then there are the Nagas and the Asuras, who are the bad gods, and when they talk about many of the groups of the Asuras, they all live underground.
Yes, they do. Definitely. Their abode is the subterranean world, and the abode of the gods are celestial planets, other planets above the plane of the solar system. But even it seems in the upper atmosphere of the earth, when you read the Puranic narrations about the activities of the Krishna avatar, they were witnessed by angelic creatures who lived above the clouds. It seems that they lived in the stratosphere, perhaps in the ultraviolet frequency, and they would shower flowers upon the Krishna avatar when he would defeat a demon or create some superordinary act or activity. But they would they were witnessing him, these godlike beings from above. So that's there. The angelic creatures who live high in the atmosphere, and the demonic creatures who live below us in the depths and in the bowels of the earth. That's definitely there. I think
the beings that live in the sky. Just one little follow-up question: do you think they live in the third dimension, or do you think they live in some higher dimensional plane?
Well, I don't think much of in terms of dimensions. I've been very influenced by Joseph Cater, and he speaks of frequency worlds of higher frequency, and worlds of lower frequency. Mm-hmm. But no, I think they live in a higher frequency world, and I think that we could be in the same room with them, so to speak, or we could fly up in one of our aircraft and pass through their world, and we wouldn't be perceived by them, and they wouldn't perceive us, not necessarily. But yeah, I think they're there. The subterranean, how would you say, abodes of the demonic creatures, that's actually very well documented. It's brought up a lot in the Vedic literature, in the Puranic literature. If you'd like, I could actually run a few descriptions by your listeners.
Sure.
Well, first of all, I think it would be interesting to mention Arjuna of the Bhagavad Gita. The Gita is interesting because everybody's heard of it, at least. When I talk about the Vedic literature, everybody's heard of the Vedas, but nobody really knows what the Vedas are. Mm-hmm. The Vedas are actually ritualistic literature. They're ceremonial literature. They describe how to carry out different ceremonies, how to arrange the altars, how to go about a fire sacrifice, what mantras to chant, and things like that. But then there's the Puranic literature, which is another section of the Vedic literature. And the Puranas are historical narrations of The historical history that was interesting to that civilization, that was worth conserving and passing on to their descendants. So as part of that literature, you have the Bhagavad Gita. And in the Bhagavad Gita, you have Arjuna, the warrior. His charioteer was Krishna. The Krishna avatar agreed to become his charioteer. And on the opposing band, there was this fratricidal war because his kingdom had been usurped by his cousins when he was a child, when he was still very young. His father passed away, and his uncle took over the kingdom. Well, on the other side was Duryodhana. And when you first read the Bhagavad Gita, one of the first 2 or 3 verses, the first one who's speaking is Duryodhana. He's speaking to some of his generals on his side of the battlefield, and he's surveying this display, this military display that Arjuna has mounted on the other side. But this so everyone's familiar with the Gita. Everybody, can relate with that. This Duryodhana, he was abducted to a subterranean world. There was a time just a few years before this battle took place, when he had banished Arjuna and his brothers to the forest for 12 years. And the idea was that if he found them, they would have to add another 12 years to that and remain in the forest and not come back to claim their kingdom. So he went after them after 1 year to see if he could find them. And up in the Kashmir area, he ran across a group of Gandharvas. Gandharvas seem to be angelic beings. They have wings, and they're known for their music. These Gandharvas had cordoned off an area around a huge lake that Duryodhana wanted to go to, and they wouldn't give him access. So he became offended because he felt that this is the Earth planet and I'm the king of the Earth. He engaged in combat with them, and he was defeated and he was taken prisoner. So Arjuna, even though his cousin had become his enemy, Arjuna felt that he should use his influence with the Gandharvas to gain Duryodhana's release, and he did. This was very embarrassing to Duryodhana because he was a warrior and he had his, warrior, his chivalrous pride, that kind of thing. And he became so depressed and humiliated by this that he decided to fast until death. And at that time, it's described some of the denizens in the demonic worlds, in the netherworlds, they became disturbed because they had plans that involved Duryodhana. So they sent a demoness after him named Kritya, and she hypnotized him, and she brought him down to this subterranean world where these demons were assembled, and she turned him over to them. And they told him, these were the Danavas, it's a class of Asura, that his presence on earth, his birth, had been arranged in advance and that it was planned by them. And they explained to Duryodhana that his great strength and his immunity to weapons were also part of their manipulations, and that he shouldn't spoil their plans by fasting until death. They explained to him that some of their members, the Danavas and the Daityas, these are class of Asuras, the bad guys, that they would take birth on the surface of the earth, that they had taken birth in the warrior caste, and that they would help him in his battle against Arjuna and Arjuna's brother. They also explained that they would possess some of the principal warriors on the surface of the earth, that they would overcome their souls, and that they would make them very furious, and that they would guide them in their fight against Arjuna and his brothers. So they told him that they were going to perpetrate a holocaust, and they were going to annihilate Arjuna and all of his allies. He was taken back to the surface of the earth. He was made to forget the experience. He just vaguely remembered it and thought it was a dream, but he was left with new hope, and he was left with this idea in his mind that he was going to engage in combat against the Arjuna and his brothers, and he was going to kill them. So here we have an example that's very interesting, an example of underground manipulation of the surface world. And I think that if there's anything that people should be aware about, if there's any connections that they should make or any conclusions that they should arrive at, it's this idea that these underground worlds are there, these cavern worlds are there, and these materialistic beings are there, but that they engage in manipulation of the surface world. They take birth as humans. They walk on the surface of the earth as shapeshifters. They influence people's souls and minds. They take possession of people and influence people's thinking. And they have agendas for the surface of the earth. And this has been going on for many thousands of years. I mean, this happened 5,000 years ago while the Krishna avatar supposedly was on the planet. So what to speak of now that we're in a very materialistic age? I think that we have to interpret political events and military events on the surface of the planet. We have to interpret power blocks and, war and threats of war between the Chinese and the communists and the capitalists. I think we have to try to interpret these in terms of manipulation by these different living entities, these different races and clans of materialistic living entities that live below the surface of the earth. And this one story about the abduction of Duryodhana is, I think, a very good example. It's very typical.
Well, what I think is interesting is, the use of the word abduction, and the little bit that you shared, and I'm going to have to go back and research that story because now you got my little ears perking. What I think is interesting is that he was hypnotized, and when this whole thing transpires, at the end, he thinks he has a dream. And when you look at, both biblical stories, where Jacob thinks he's having a dream, Enoch having a dream, all these people are having a dream, or modern abduction stories where, the person is paralyzed. You hear these stories of body sensations and then they don't remember on the other side, or they think they're having a dream. I mean, it sounds very, what we're realizing now, kind of common to the abduction experience.
Sure, and these are the same living entities, and even their craft, the UFO craft, are described in the Puranic literature with the same flight characteristics. Now they appear, and then now they're there, and then a minute later they're not there. Like they're on the radar, and then they're not the radar. And they travel at some unimaginable speed, and all of a sudden they stop short, and no aircraft can do that, or they make a right angle turn at speeds that we can't even imagine. This type of flight characteristic, even the motherships that we've heard described. For example, Travis Walton, he described a type of mothership, an aircraft carrier or a flying city. These types of accounts are all there in the Puranic literature. So, yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
I mean, one of the things about reading through the Puranic literature is that, one, there's just so much. And they constantly are throwing out these names of people like you know who they are or what they do or how they fit in. I mean, it's just, you have to sit there, with Wikipedia open. It's like, okay, what is that? Okay, what is that? I mean, there's definitely research that you have to do to understand the impact. You were talking about, I don't know, the little fairy beings or these people, but if you don't realize that when they say this word, it's not like they came from France, it's, they're of this alien heritage, which really changes the story a lot.
Yeah.
You know,
the Vedic literature, it really is vast. I can imagine a person who just cracks a book and wants to read a Purana. I mean, I think the familiarity with the few Puranas that I have, you know, it's something that I acquired gradually over a few years of reading. One interesting book in this regard would actually be Alien Identities, and that's where you can read about this abduction account involving Duryodhana. Are you familiar with Alien Identities?
No, I've never heard that one.
Well, you're familiar with Forbidden Archaeology, I imagine.
Yes, we've had Michael on several times, and actually he's coming back on in a few weeks. Yeah.
Well, the co-author to that book was Richard Thompson. And Dr. Thompson, he wrote his own book called Alien Identities. And in this book, to me it's similar to the Michael Mott book. What he did was he took all of these accounts of demonic beings and materialistic beings that you find in UFO type of beings in the Vedic literature, the Puranic literature, and he related them to Western folklore, you know, the leprechauns and the trolls and fairies and those types of beings. And he did just a great job of them. He related the descriptions of the flying cities that are there in the Puranas with some of these other UFO accounts. So that one, it breaks it down for you. He does all the work for you, and he explains it for the Western reader. He does a very good job of that. It's called Alien Identities, and the book is still out there. It's available.
All right, making a little note on my paper.
Okay. But really, I'm amazed at the way this story by this abduction account by Duryodhana just shows so well how these living entities that live beneath the surface of the earth engage in manipulation. You know, what goes on the surface. I think that Whitley Strieber, he also had some experience like that. He was given some agendas, some writing to do, something like that. You know, they don't abduct people that wash dishes in restaurants. They always abduct people who have some type of influence.
Well, I don't know about that part, or maybe they don't realize they have a certain something going on, you know, at the time that they have been abducted, you know, that might end up coming out because of their experience or whatever. I mean, I have a good friend of mine, Tom Reed, who his family has been a family of abductees. He was abducted, his mother was abducted, his brother was abducted, you know, and that's as far back as they can go historically. You know, but if you meet the guy, he's just this regular guy who's had this really bizarre experience, and his brother has had similar bizarre experiences. You know what I mean? And so, you know, it's not like, well, nope, you know what? Cancel that. His dad was a politician. I think he was like he was a state senator or something like that. Okay, cancel that. But he's very unassuming in personality by himself. But anyway, but because of their experiences, they have really been moving forward and getting their story out. You know, if they didn't have this experience, then they probably wouldn't have done anything, and he would just be some regular guy.
Right. Well, there do seem to be several motives actually for abduction, and one of them is seems to be a sexual motive. You know, that's there in the European accounts, the medieval accounts, the trolls that abduct the beautiful young maiden, that kind of thing. It's also there in the Puranic literature. In my book, I have this chapter on Prince Ritudhvaj. It's from the Dattatreya Purana. But his wife was abducted by a shape-shifting demon who appeared as a humble mendicant, a Brahmin, a humble monk, something like that. And he sent the the prince off in one direction because he told about the demons and they did this and they did that, and then when the prince went off, he abducted his wife and took her down to his underground world and insisted that she marry him. But Ritudwaj, he was a very specific human being. He's an empowered human being, and he went after her. He took his horse and he followed this demon down to his world. The demon's house is described. His palace, his underground palace, is described. The servants there are described. It was all very opulent and shining and beautiful. And this Ritudwaj, he fought the demon, and he was able to capture her and bring her back. He did this with the help of some Nagas, actually. The Nagas, they have a fame of being not so inimical towards the human beings. They've actually done a lot of favors, and they've been favorable towards human beings also. But there's that story also. That was simply an example of pure sexual abduction on the part of the demon. Kidnap the man's wife because she's very beautiful and take her away.
But you hear stories like that in other mythology, like Zeus changing his shape and having sex with women, and with the production of demigods on the other end.
Yeah. I mean, the human beings, we seem to be the playthings of the gods and the playthings of the demons. And they both appear on human society. If you read the Bhagavad Purana, if you read the story of the Krishna avatar, the demigods gathered with Brahma. Brahma is the chief of the demigods. He's the original. He's the creator of this universe. They gathered together at the shore of the Garbhodak Ocean, and Brahma entered into contact through some type of mental telepathy with Vishnu, whose abode is in the middle of this ocean. And he expressed that the earth was being overburdened by demons who had taken birth in the kingly order, along the lines that we just described. These demons told Duryodhana that we're already there. We have other warriors that are we've taken birth as warriors. We're already there. So the Vishnu communicated to Brahma that the demigods should take birth also in the dynasty of Vrishni and in the Yadu dynasty, and that he would incarnate and he would help the Yadu dynasty. This was the dynasty of Arjuna and his brothers, to rid the face of the earth of these demoniac kings. So they all took birth on the earth also. So in this huge army, you had Arjuna's army on one side. There were all of these demigods that had taken birth as human. And on the other side, you had all of these demons who had incarnated as human kings. In fact, Arjuna was the son of Indra, who is one of the big commanders of the demigods. His brother Bhima was the son of Pavana, who is the wind god, and his oldest brother, the rightful emperor, was Yudhishthir. He was actually a direct incarnation of Yama, who is the demigod that determines our next birth according to our karmic activities in this birth. So even their birth, the birth of Arjuna and his brothers, was a very privileged birth. So the demigods do this, and the materialistic living entities, they also take birth on the earth, and they both they compete with each other and try to establish supremacy on the earth, something like that.
Well, I am looking at the time. Let's see, Supreme. If I could write at all, it would be so much better. Why don't we take a break here, because I want to come back to that whole concept of power, control, supremacy, because I think that's a really interesting, because it was going on in the myths, and it seems like it's still going on now. And I'd like to explore that a little more, but we have less than a minute before the commercial time, so I think we'll just move the commercials up a little bit and come back and go into that topic. Sound good?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I guess if I push the button, then the music actually will come up. Okay. There it is. Okay, so I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and we are here talking to Dean Dominic De Lucia about the hollow earth in the Puranas. His website is www.holloworbs.com, and we'll be back with Dean after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.